What's going on guys, Jin here, and this is an Infinite Razor Wings build. It clears overworld, hordes and ubers very quickly, and farms tier 90 pits efficiently, whilst being able to push past 95 plus. So let's get into the build. So starting with the skill tree, we're going to be taking 4 into Thunder Spike, and going for Accelerated Thunder Spike. We're going to skip core skills entirely. Then in our focus skills, we're going to take 1 into Focal Point, and 3 into Apex. Also 1 into Mirage, 3 into Unrestrained Power, 1 into Ravager, and go for Replenishing Ravager. In our defensive skills, we're going to be taking 1 into Endurance, and 3 into Perseverance, 2 into Armored Hide, going for Reinforced Armored Hide, 1 into Counterattack, going for Reinforced Counterattack, 1 into Scourge, with Enhanced Scourge, and then 1 into Patient Guard, with 3 in Auspicious. Then we go down to our Potency skills. We're taking 3 into Resilient, and 3 into Dominant. We're also going to take 3 into Vehemence, Brilliance, and Acceleration. Then we're going to take 5 into Razor Wings, going for the Invasive Razor Wings. And then we're taking 3 into Potent. Then in our ultimate skills, we're going to take 3 into Resolution, 1 into Spiritual Attunement, and 3 into Supremacy. Then we're going to go for 2 into the Hunter, with the additional nodes. Last but not least, we're taking our key passive, Prodigy's Tempo. Next up we have the Paragon Board. For our first board, the glyph is going to be Canny, that gives us non-physical damage, a non-physical damage multiplier, and non-physical damage increases all the non-physical damage an enemy takes from us by 1% up to 15% for 15 seconds. For our second board, it's going to be Convergence, so we deal bonus damage equal to 20% of our 2 highest bonus to damage types combined, up to 30% total. And the glyph is going to be Spirit, that gives us damage to elites, critical strike damage, and critical strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from us by 3% per 20 seconds, up to 15%. Our third board is going to be Revealing, so on lucky hit, we have up to a 30% chance to knock down vulnerable enemies. We also deal 30% increased damage to crowd controlled enemies. As for the glyph, we're going to be using Colossal, that gives us gorilla damage, and damage to close enemies. Also we deal 2% increased damage for each stack of resolve we have. For our fourth board, we're going to be going for Sapping, so when we cast 3 gorilla, jaguar, eagle or centipede skills with the same spirit in a row, we restore 15% of our vigor, and deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. As for the glyph, we're going to be using Talon. That gives us a lot of eagle damage, lightning damage, and our eagle skills deal 15% increased critical strike damage. For our final board, we're going to be using Vicious Shield, so we do 1% increased damage for each 3% of our maximum life we have as a barrier. And for the glyph, we're using Revenge. That gives us bonus to all rare nodes within range, and dealing Thorns damage to an enemy increases all damage it takes from us by 1%, up to 15% for 10 seconds. And we also get a percentage increase in damage. Pretty straightforward here. One alternative that you could do, instead of Canny, you could use Fulminate. So for every 5 intelligence purchased within range, you deal increased lightning damage, and you deal 12% increased lightning damage to both healthy and injured enemies. You also get an increase in lightning damage as the legendary bonus. Next up, we have the Mercenaries. For our primary mercenary, we're going to be using Rahir, and we're going to go down the left side here for Shield Charge, Rahir's Guard, Crater, and Iron Wolf's Call. Alternatively, you can take Provoke and Mocking Lure. As our reinforcement, we're taking Variana, and we're going to be using Earthbreaker as her skill, and we're going to attach that to Scourge. Next, for the Spirit Hall. For the primary spirit, we'll be taking Gorilla. So casting a Gorilla skill deals 100% thorns to enemies we hit and grants barrier for 5% of our max life, up to 30% for 3 seconds, and all skills are now also Gorilla skills. For our secondary spirit, we're also using Gorilla, which gives us maximum resolve increased by 2, and when we have at least 5 stacks of resolve, we're now unstoppable. Alternatively, you can use Jaguar, that gives you maximum ferocity increased by 1, and gain 1 stack of ferocity whenever you kill an enemy or damage a boss. Next up, we have the Witch powers. So for our unique Witch power, I'm going to be using Vengeful Spirit Servant. And then we're going to be taking 3 Growth and Decay Witch powers, starting with Soul Harvest, Hex of Whispers, and Aura of Siphoning. And then we're going to be taking Aura Specialization, and Breath of the Coven. I did experiment for a little bit with Twilight Warding, but during this current patch it has been disabled, though in future it could be a useful one to have for this build. Next up we have the gear. So starting with the helm, we're going to be using a Harlequin crest that gives us maximum life, max resource, armor, and cooldown reduction. Also we gain 20% damage reduction, and plus 4 ranks to all skills. For the sockets, we're going to be using Zan and Vex, so whenever we cast an ultimate skill, we gain plus 1 to all skills for 10 seconds. For the masterworking, you're going to go for cooldown reduction twice and armor once. Next up, we have the chest piece. We're going to be using Shroud of False Death. That gives us 1 to all passives, all stats, max life, damage on next attack after entering stealth, and resource generation. Also, if you haven't dealt damage in the last 2 seconds, you gain stealth and 40% movement speed. For the sockets, we're going to be using 2 emeralds for the dexterity. And for the masterworking, we're going to try and get the all stats. Next up, for the gloves, we're going to be using some standard gloves here, with dexterity, attack speed, and critical strike chance. For the tempering, we're doing lucky hit chance to slow, or barrier generation, and critical strike damage. For the masterworking, we want to try and masterwork the critical strike chance. As for the aspect, we're using vehement brawlers. So casting an ultimate skill increases our damage by 10 to 30% for 8 seconds, and we gain 2 additional ultimate skill ranks. Alternatively, you can use Fists of Fate here, and just like the standard gloves, you would want to masterwork the critical strike chance. Next up, we have the pants. We're going to be using standard pants here with max life, armor, and resist all. We're going to temper that with barrier generation and total armor percent. For the aspect, we'll use interdiction, so we gain 1 to 15% block chance per resolve stack. Masterworking wise, you want to masterwork the resistance to all elements, and try and get a great affix on that if possible, as that frees up a slot on your boots. For the sockets, we're using 2 amethysts for barrier generation. Next up, the boots. We're just going to be using standard boots here with dexterity, movement speed, and either all resist, maximum life, or armor. If your resistance to all elements and your armor are fine, then go for the maximum life. And for the masterworking, you would masterwork the movement speed, or whichever stat you're missing, whether that be resistance or armor, etc. As for the tempering, we're going to go for movement speed and vortex size. And for the aspect, we'll be using apprehension, so once an enemy is slowed by at least 80%, they become feared for 3 seconds, and we deal 20 to 40% increased damage to feared enemies. Alternatively, you can use exploiters, so you have 20% increased crowd control duration while enemies are unstoppable, and you deal 25 to 45% increased damage to them. Also, you want to make sure the implicit on your boots are attacks reduce evades cooldown. Next up, we have the weapon. We're going to be using the Sun-Stained War Crozier. That gives us dexterity, maximum life, chance for potency skills to deal double damage, and ranks into focus skills. Also, our focus skills benefit from all of their upgrades, and they increase the damage of our potency skills by 10 to 20% for 8 seconds, up to 100 to 200%. For the masterworking, we're going to try and masterwork the chance for potency skills to deal double damage. As for the sockets, we're going to be using Yule and Cry. Yule Cry. So whenever you cast a skill with the cooldown 6 times, you'll invoke the Spiritborn's Vortex skill, dealing damage and pulling in enemies. And whenever this activates, it will activate the unique aspect of the Sun-Stained War Crozier, increasing the damage of your potency skills. Next up, we have the Amulet. We're going to be using a standard Amulet. We're looking for something with dexterity, total armor percent, and ranks into potent. We're going to temper this with critical strike damage, and Armored Hide active duration. As for the masterworking, you want to try and masterwork the total armor, unless it's a greater affix. In that case you would want to masterwork potent. As for the aspect, we're going to be using the aspect of redirected force, so we gain increased critical strike damage equal to 45 to 105% of our block chance, and blocking doubles this bonus for 10 seconds. For the socket, we're going to be using the occult gem Duststone, so for each of our auras or hexes and enemies inflicted with, they take 2.5% increased damage from us. For our first ring, we're going to be going for something with dexterity, attack speed and critical strike chance. We're going to temper that with critical strike damage and razor wing charges. For the masterworking, you want to masterwork the critical strike chance. Aspect wise, we're going to be using Endless Talons, so razor wings hits increase your eagle skill damage by 1% for 4 seconds, stacking up to 30 to 50%, and razor wing critical strikes grant 3 stacks. For the socket, we'll be using the occult gem Friend of the Bog, so while we have 3 or more growth and decay witch powers active, we gain 8% primary core stat, 10% maximum life, and unhindered. The second ring is going to be exactly the same as the first ring, all the same affixes and tempering, and the same masterworking. As for the aspect, we'll be using unyielding hits, so casting a gorilla skill increases our weapon damage by 10 to 30% of our armor for 3 seconds, for a maximum of 1500 bonus weapon damage, which you will gain at 5000 armor. As for the socket, we'll be using Moonlight Ward, so for each rank in our equipped unique witch power, we gain 3% damage reduction and 0.5% maximum resistance to all elements. That wraps up the gear aspect of the build. Now let's go on to the gameplay loop. So for the gameplay loop, the most important thing to remember is that the last thing you cast before you cast the Hunter should be a cast of Razor Wings. That allows it to refresh its cooldowns and allows you to cast infinite Razor Wings. So what you typically want to do is cast the Hunter, and then cast all your abilities right after it, and then go back to casting Razor Wings, and then you can continue the loop. If you find a big group of enemies, then cast Scourge as well, and then back to Razor Wings. So basically right after the Hunter finishes, you have time to cast all your other things, and then back to Razor Wings. And if you're in the overworld, you kind of don't need to use all your other abilities, as the Razor Wings will just clear, so what you can do is just use the Hunter, and when it's on cooldown you just evade. When you're in higher tier pits, you'll do everything the same as before, use the Hunter or your abilities, but then throw in evades at the end. And that'll give you the bonus damage from acceleration. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, learned something, or made it this far, please leave a like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment in the comment section if you want to. It really helps out a lot, and I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot guys, and if you want more builds from Season 7, click on one of these videos. Bye!